Hi, we are here with Chapter 4, Section 3. We're going to cover two more ways to prove that triangles are congruent. That's angle, side, angle, and angle, angle, side. The first thing you need to do is make the correction that should be Section 3. Okay, so the first way to prove, or the third way actually in our list, is to prove triangles congruent by angle, side, angle. Notice we need two angles to be congruent to each other, and we need the included side from each of those to also be congruent. Notice the S is between the two angles, just like the side here is between the two angles on the triangles. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, don't forget to keep your correspondences correct. Notice this is a postulate just like the other two ways. And remember the other two ways that we looked at were side, side, side and side, angle, side. Okay, the fourth way to prove triangles congruent is called angle, angle, side. Notice the side is not between the two angles. The side is not between the two angles. So in a picture, if we had two triangles, and let's go ahead and call these guys A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. Very creative names I have here. One possible set of markings would be that angle A was congruent to angle X, that angle B was congruent to angle Y, and then I need a side that is not included by those two angles. So, for example, I could know that side BC was congruent to side YZ. Now, do keep in mind, be careful. Notice the side that is marked here is touching angle B. The side that is marked here is also touching angle B. That means they are the corresponding sides for the two triangles. Excuse me, this side's touching angle Y, the double angle. If this triangle had had side XZ marked, we would not have a true correspondence and we would not be able to use angle, angle, sides. Take a second and see if you can write the congruent statement for the two triangles. Okay, so you could write triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. Okay, moving on to the examples at the bottom of the page, we're going to do a few of these. So, for number one, they're asking you what additional information would you need to prove the two triangles congruent by the given postulate or theorem. So if we look here, we're going to try to use angle, side, angle on these two triangles. Right now, we have a pair of angles that have been marked congruent. We also have our lovely reflexive side. It's shared by the two triangles. Now, because I want to use angle, side, angle, the side needs to be included by the two angles. So in order for that to happen, I would need another pair of angles to be congruent. I need it to be the pair that includes side BD. So I would need to know that angle ABD was congruent to angle CBD. If I had that extra piece of information, I would then have enough to say these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. In the second example, I went ahead and I added numbers to the picture because to have angle, angle, side, first of all, we would be able to easily prove angle J was congruent to angle L since they're both right angles and all right angles are congruent. And we also, of course, have this reflexive side. Okay. And again, I need a pair of angles to be congruent so that my side is not included by those congruent angles. So one possible option is that angle 4 is congruent to angle 2. Angle 4 is congruent to angle 2. That would work for us. Again, I'd be going from the right angle to this angle and then across, and the same here, right angle to angle 2 and then across. Now the other option is a possibility that angle 1 was congruent to angle 3. Either of those pieces of information would help me to prove that these were congruent by angle, angle, side. Okay, the next thing we want to do is take a look at example 3. We're trying to prove the two triangles congruent by angle, side, angle. They've already given us a pair of sides that were congruent, and they also gave us another pair of angles that are congruent, even though they didn't mark them. So if you take a look, what angles do you know are congruent? That's right, the vertical angles, of course, would be congruent. Now, if I'm going to have angle, side, angle, I need this pair of sides to be included by the two congruent angles. So if I take a look at my picture, that would mean to me I would need to have angle X turn out to be congruent to angle V, and then I could prove this by angle, side, angle. In number 4, we're trying to prove the two triangles congruent by angle, angle, side. And again, I already have the pair of angles that are congruent. I also have the reflexive side. So, because I do not want the side to be included in the angle, then I do not want these two angles at the top here to be congruent. I would want angle Y to turn out to be congruent to angle O. Okay, we're going to continue on to page 2. We'll revisit these last couple of examples in class. Thank you. Hi, on page 2, we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill in this proof on example number 7, and we're actually going to do the proof on example 8. Okay, so for example 7, this is a little bit strange, but you had many givens. Let's make sure they're all marked. TX was parallel to BW, great. You also had TU was congruent to VU, also marked. And you also had that angle XTU was congruent to angle WVU, again marked. And you were also given that angle UWV was a right angle. So they marked everything for you. I'm going to add to the picture though by making the parallel lines be red. That way you can see that the only transversal we have crossing those two parallel lines right now is line XW or segment XW. Okay, so we know that angle UWV is a right angle, and that's a given. And then very strangely, all of these were left open, and of course those are your other 1, 2, 3 givens. So go ahead, take a second and fill those in. Okay, if you filled those in, this is what you should have. Again, the order doesn't matter because they're all givens. You could put them in any order you like. So the next step says angle UXT is a right angle, and I take a look up here, this is angle UXT. Why would I know that it's a right angle? Well, I have these parallel lines. I'm perpendicular to one of the parallel lines, and therefore I'm perpendicular to the other. So if a line forms a right angle with one parallel line, then it forms a right angle with the other parallel line. Okay, for number 6, why do we know that angle UWV, that's this guy, is congruent to angle UXT? That's that guy. Well, that would be because all right angles are congruent. Next one says angle UWV, angle, we're missing a step. I'm not sure what happened. We're going to go ahead and continue on. Angle XTU, which is this guy, is congruent to angle WVU. And that was a given. We're going to go ahead and fill that in. And number 9, then, we're going to go ahead and say these two triangles are congruent because if you take a look at your markings, you have two angles marked congruent to each other. You have a non-included side marked congruent, and therefore these are congruent by angle, side. Okay, continuing on to the next proof. You're being given that WX, I'm going to go ahead and make that green, is parallel to ZY. I'm also going to make that green. You're also being given that WZ, I'm going to make that red, is parallel to XY. Again, you're trying to prove these two triangles are congruent to each other. Well, let's go ahead and you guys take a second, put down your givens, and then ask yourself, if I know lines are parallel, what would I do next? Okay. So, if you know the lines are parallel, what are you going to do next? Well, of course, special angles. So, if I use the two red parallel lines, I see this lovely Z being formed, and therefore I know this angle is congruent to this angle, and that would be angle, I'm going to number them, angle 1 and angle 2. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and my reason will be alternate interior angle theorem. Now, by the same theorem, but using the green parallel lines, you should also see a second Z, which will make this angle congruent to this one, and let's call those angle 3 and angle 4. So angle 3 is congruent to angle 4 for the same reason. If you check out your markings, you now have a pair of angles congruent from each of the triangles, a second pair of angles, and then let's put in our reflexive side. Segment WY is congruent to segment WY, and your reason is reflexive property. You now have enough to say that the two triangles are congruent to each other. Be careful to follow your correspondence. WYX congruent to triangle YWZ, and our reason would be angle, side, angle postulate. And this would be theorem. Back up at the top. Okay, we're almost out of time for our little video. We're going to stop here and we will look at the rest of these examples in class. Have a great day.